Right now, millions of American parents are treating a powerful, completely unregulated brain-altering hormone like it's, well, a chewable Flintstones vitamin.
Yeah, it's really become normalized.
Exactly. You might even have a bottle of them in your kitchen cabinet right now. You know, those squishy strawberry or grape-flavored sleepy gummies.
Oh, they're everywhere.
They really are. They've basically become as standard in the modern bedtime routine as brushing teeth. But our mission for today's deep dive is to unpack a really staggering piece of data. We're looking at a 530% explosion in the number of kids taking melatonin to sleep.
Which is a massive jump.
Huge. And we're going to get into why the medical community is currently raising massive, massive red flags about it. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it. Because, the sheer volume of usage is unprecedented. And the sources we're synthesizing today, they really don't mince words about the risks here.
Right, and we're pulling from some heavy hitters,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. We're looking at a major March 2026 review from the World Journal of Pediatrics, alongside some really expensive data from a January 2026 JAMO Network Open study.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, and to contextualize those findings, we've integrated urgent clinical guidance from Harvard Health, the Mayo Clinic, and the American Academy of Pediatrics.
So the entire medical establishment, basically.
Pretty much.
Sure.
And the unified consensus across all these institutions is that we have fundamentally misunderstood what melatonin is and, more importantly, what it does to a developing body.
Yeah, I feel like we have to start by just completely stripping away the marketing, like the cute bears, the fruity flavors, the brightly colored bottles.
Friendly packaging.
Right, because they've engineered this cultural illusion that melatonin is, I don't know, an herbal supplement or some gentle sleep-inducing mineral.
And it is absolutely not.
It's not. It's a systemic hormone. So to really understand the concern here, we need to look at how endogenous melatonin, like the stuff your brain makes naturally, actually operates.
Right, the biological baseline.
Exactly. It's less like a switch that just knocks you out cold and more like a tiny boss in your brain, or like a biological dimmer switch hooked up to your body's internal thermostat.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, so when the sun goes down and environmental light drops, your brain's pineal gland releases this hormone. And this tiny boss basically sends a biochemical announcement to the whole body saying, hey, time to shut down. It slowly cools your core body temperature and actively inhibits the wake-promoting neurons.
Right. It acts as the biochemical brakes for the central nervous system.
Exactly.
And the profound irony here is that healthy human physiology already manufactures this perfectly, for free, every single night, guided by our circadian rhythm.
Right. We literally already have it.
What's fascinating here is how the regulatory environment in the United States has completely warped the public's perception. Because here, this hormone isn't categorized as a drug.
Which still blows my mind.
It's classified as an over-the-counter dietary supplement.
Just a supplement.
Right. This means it entirely bypasses FDA efficacy and safety testing for kids. You can just walk into any supermarket and find it wedged right between the breakfast cereal and the toothpaste.
Yeah.
But globally, the U.S. is operating as an extreme outlier.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
The sources actually include this brilliant anecdote that highlights just how bizarre the American approach is compared to the rest of the scientific world.
Oh, the Danish neuroscientist story?
Yes. So a leading Danish neuroscientist was visiting the U.S. for a conference. She walks into a standard stop-and-shop grocery store in Rhode Island, and she sees this aisle. Shelves packed top to bottom with kid-friendly, brightly colored melatonin gummies.
And she couldn't believe it.
She was so utterly stunned, she literally took out her phone to take photos to send to her colleagues back home.
Which makes perfect sense when you realize that in Denmark, as well as in the UK, Japan, Australia, and so many other nations, melatonin is a strictly controlled prescription-only drug.
Wow. Prescription only.
Yeah. Over there, a pediatrician has to specifically evaluate a child, diagnose an actual physiological deficit, and prescribe a heavily monitored exact dosage.
That is a completely different world.
It is. The idea of an exhausted American parent just tossing a bottle of hormones into a shopping cart next to a bunch of bananas. Internationally, that's viewed as a massive failure of public health policy.
I mean, I want you, the listener, to just pause and genuinely think about the implication of that for a second. Think about the last time you bought an unregulated hormone at the grocery store without even realizing what it was.
It's wild when you frame it like that.
Right.
Yeah.
because we would never casually hand a toddler like a chewable gummy of insulin or testosterone just to see if it makes the evening routine go a bit smoother.
No, of course not.
Yet we're doing exactly that with melatonin.
We are. And the stark contrast between European regulations and our American supermarket shelves, it really leads us into the granular data of why researchers right now, in 2026, are issuing these massive warnings.
Because there's a dark side to this boom.
Definitely. When you commercialize a powerful hormone with zero oversight, you generate systemic risks. The data from the JAMA Network Open Study and the Pediatric Review highlight 3 distinct major red flags.
Okay, but let me play the skeptic here for a second on behalf of every exhausted parent listening.
Go for it.
Because a parent staring down a screaming toddler at 9 p.m., they are not thinking about endocrinology, right?
No, they're thinking about survival.
Exactly. They are desperate for rest.
Yeah.
So if the body naturally produces this substance anyway, how dangerous can a little extra strawberry-flavored hormone really be if it just, prevents a nightly psychological meltdown for the whole family?
And that desperation is totally valid. The marketing preys directly on that exact feeling. But this first red flag we found in the data, it effectively shatters the idea that you are just giving them a little extra.
What do you mean?
The scientific community is documenting a widespread phenomenon of label lies, basically. Massive label inaccuracy.
Well, because it's unregulated.
Right. Because these products are categorized as supplements, the dosage printed on the back of the bottle often has literally zero correlation with the chemical reality inside the gummy.
The testing on this in the sources is staggering.
It's terrifying.
One of the major studies analyzed all these over-the-counter melatonin products, and they discovered that some contained 478% more melatonin than the label stated.
Almost 5 times the dose.
Yes. So a parent thinks they're giving a gentle half-milligram dose, but they're actually flooding a 30-pound child's central nervous system with a massive hormonal wave.
And it gets worse. The lack of quality control introduces an even more alarming variable. Independent lab testing revealed that a significant percentage of these pediatric gummies illegally contain serotonin.
Wait, serotonin?
Yes.
Finding serotonin in a child's over-the-counter sleep supplement is objectively terrifying.
It is a massive clinical violation.
Because serotonin is a totally different class of neurotransmitters. It tightly regulates mood, cognition, vascular tone, digestion. In clinical medicine, altering a patient's serotonin requires strict prescription drugs, like SSRIs, and careful psychiatric monitoring.
Exactly.
So how on earth does a powerful neurotransmitter accidentally end up in a factory making toddler sleep aids?
Well, it comes down to really cheap, botched chemical synthesis.
Wow.
Yeah. Melatonin is naturally synthesized from serotonin. So in these low-quality, unregulated manufacturing facilities, the chemical conversion process is often incomplete.
Oh, I see.
Right, so it just leaves raw, active serotonin degrading directly into the gummy mixture.
That is insane.
When a child ingests this, they aren't just getting an unmeasured blast of melatonin, they're absorbing exogenous serotonin, which can completely wreak havoc on the peripheral nervous system.
Like what kind of havoc?
It can cause severe gastrointestinal distress, cardiovascular fluctuations, and in acute cases, it can actually push a child towards serotonin toxicity.
Which is incredibly dangerous.
Very. It triggers autonomic instability and hyperreflexia. The point is, you simply do not know what chemical compounds you are actually handing your child.
Okay, so when you mislabel a drug, you create unpredictable dosing. But when you package that mislabeled drug as a candy gummy, you invite the second major danger the sources identify.
Accidental massive ingestion.
Right. Because children are hardwired to seek out sweets. Melatonin has recently become the #1 cause of accidental overdose in children under 5 in United States emergency rooms.
Number 1. Let that sink in. We have to look at the cascading effect of that data. We're talking about a scenario where a 3-year-old wakes up, finds the bottle on the counter, assumes they're regular gummy bears, and consumes 15 of them while the parents are asleep.
Yeah, and the physiological result of a massive melatonin overdose in a small body is profound central nervous system depression.
It really is.
The statistics from the Pediatric Review are incredibly grim here. These accidental ingestions have driven 27,795 emergency room visits in recent years.
Unbelievable.
It is. They've resulted in 287 intensive care unit admissions due to extreme lethargy, hypotension, and dangerous respiratory depression.
Yeah, their breathing basically slows down to dangerous levels.
And tragically, the data confirms 2 deaths directly linked to pediatric melatonin overdoses.
It's heartbreaking.
So this isn't just some theoretical risk. It is a profound, measurable safety hazard rooted entirely in how the product is designed and legally categorized in the U.S.
Absolutely. Surviving an acute overdose is a nightmare, but the third danger the sources identify is arguably far more insidious because it's completely invisible. It happens over years.
The long-term unknowns.
Yes. The World Journal of Pediatrics review highlights the long-term unknowns of chronic use. Because melatonin doesn't just temporarily cool the body and induce sleep, it operates systemically. It binds to receptors in the brain, the cardiovascular system, the pancreas, and critically, the reproductive system.
Okay, the reproductive system is the detail that should stop any parent in their tracks.
It completely changes the conversation.
It fundamentally shifts it. How exactly does a sleep hormone interact with a child's reproductive development?
Right, so it involves something called the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, or the HPG axis for short.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
It is. But basically, in early childhood, natural melatonin levels are at their lifetime peak. Biologically, one of melatonin's main functions at that age is to act as an inhibitory signal. It keeps the brakes on the release of gonadotropins.
And gonadotropins are the hormones that eventually trigger puberty, right?
Exactly. So as a child naturally ages, their endogenous melatonin production drops. That takes the biochemical brakes off and allows normal pubertal development to finally begin.
Wow. So if a parent is artificially pumping a child full of highly concentrated exogenous melatonin every single night for years, they are theoretically keeping those biochemical brakes clamped down.
Precisely. They could be altering the onset or the progression of puberty.
It is heavy.
It is. And the clinical reality is that we just do not have long-term, multi-decade safety data on what this does to a developing endocrine system.
Right, because this boom is so recent.
Exactly. One group of researchers in our sources literally referred to this specific trend as a vast, uncontrolled medical experiment.
A vast, uncontrolled medical experiment.
Wow. And it's the usage duration that really elevates this from a minor concern to a systemic alarm. The Jemima data reveals that 40 to 50% of children who start using melatonin are still taking it 2 to 3 years later.
So it transitions from a quick 3-day fix for a sleep regression into a permanent biological crutch.
Millions of children are unknowingly acting as longitudinal test subjects for chronic hormone supplementation.
Completely without endocrinological oversight.
Exactly. But having unpacked all the scary stuff, the ER visits, the serotonin contamination, the HPG axis risks, we do need to apply some necessary clinical nuance here.
Right, because melatonin isn't inherently evil.
No, not at all. The sources are definitive that melatonin itself is not a toxin. It is a highly effective, vital medical tool when applied to the correct physiological deficit.
Okay, so who actually needs it?
The data strongly supports its prescribed use for children diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and ADHD.
And the mechanism behind why it works for that specific demographic is fascinating, because it proves melatonin's value as a targeted hormone replacement therapy, rather than just a universal sleep hack for everyone.
Exactly. Children with autism often present with a distinct physiological and genetic difference in their serotonin-melatonin synthesis pathways.
Right.
They frequently have mutations in what's called the ASMT gene. This gene affects the specific enzyme responsible for converting serotonin into melatonin.
So their bodies physically struggle to make the conversion.
Right. Consequently, their bodies simply do not produce a sufficient baseline of endogenous melatonin. Their internal dimmer switch is, biochemically speaking, broken.
So for those children, the studies confirm that a rigorously prescribed, doctor-monitored melatonin supplement is transformative.
Oh, completely life-changing.
It helps them fall asleep 25 minutes faster, extends total sleep time by over 30 minutes. It radically improves their neurocognitive baseline and a whole family's quality of life.
But again, in these cases, it is a targeted treatment for a known, diagnosed biological deficit.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because for the vast majority of neurotypical children, that biological deficit does not exist.
No, their brains are perfectly capable of manufacturing melatonin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when we provide an external hormone to a healthy endocrine system every night, the body recognizes the surplus and initiates a process called downregulation.
Yes. The brain essentially decreases its own natural production and reduces the sensitivity of its own melatonin receptors.
The brain gets lazy.
It really does.
We have to recognize that sleep is not just a switch you flip with a pill.
Yeah.
It is a complex biological skill. It's the learned transition from a sympathetic, wakeful state to a parasympathetic, restful state.
Right, it takes practice.
It does. And by overriding that process with a gummy every night, we are actively preventing children's bodies from practicing a function they literally evolved to perform naturally.
Which brings us to the clinical alternative. The alternative to this shortcut is what the medical community calls good sleep hygiene.
I know, I know.
I recognize that phrase lacks the immediate gratification of a gummy.
Oh, totally. I know exactly what a sleep-deprived listener is thinking right now. Sleep hygiene sounds like patronizing advice from someone who has never wrestled a hyperactive 4-year-old into pajamas.
Fair enough.
It is incredibly difficult to enforce. But when we look at the actual physiological mechanisms behind these steps, it becomes crystal clear why doctors demand it before ever writing a prescription.
So let's look at the pediatric sleep toolkit outlined in the sources. It relies entirely on behavioral and environmental biology.
Okay, step 1 is shutting down screens a full hour before bed. Why is the biological impact of an iPad so detrimental to sleep architecture?
It comes down to intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells in the eyes.
Okay, another mouthful.
Yeah, but basically, these specialized cells in the eye are highly sensitive to the short wavelength blue light emitted by phones, tablets, televisions.
Right.
So when a child stares at a screen, those cells send a direct signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. That's the brain's master clock.
Yeah.
And it tricks that clock into believing the sun is still high in the sky. So the master clock signals the pineal gland to completely halt melatonin release.
Wow.
The screen is literally engaging a biological override against the sleep cycle. But the absolute second you remove the blue light, natural melatonin synthesis is allowed to initiate.
You're just removing the friction, stopping the hormone from doing its job.
Exactly.
Which leads to step 2 of the toolkit. This focuses on a rigid, consistent bedtime. Every single night, including weekends.
Because circadian rhythms operate on entrainment, the central nervous system thrives on predictable patterns.
It's a routine machine.
It is. When you enforce an identical sleep time, the brain learns the schedule. It actually begins a preemptive, slow-drip release of natural melatonin an hour before bedtime.
Oh, that's cool. It anticipates it.
Yes. But if you constantly shift the target, like 8 p.m. on Tuesday, 10 p.m. on Friday, the suprachiasmatic nucleus loses its predictability. The hormone pump just isn't primed, which results in a child who is physically exhausted but biochemically wide awake.
That makes so much sense. Okay, step 3 addresses the physical environment, keeping the child's room incredibly dark and noticeably cool.
Right, because darkness is the evolutionary trigger for melatonin production. Blackout curtains are essentially a non-pharmacological sleep intervention,
Temperature.
equally vital. As we discussed earlier, melatonin works by lowering core body temperature through vasodilation, basically pushing heat out to the hands and feet.
Right.
If the room is too warm, the body struggles to shed that heat, which mechanically delays the onset of the deep sleep phases.
Okay, and the final step in the clinical toolkit is a strict wind-down ritual. So, a warm bath, a specific sequence of books, dim lighting, in the exact same order every night.
This relies on the psychological principle of classical conditioning, combined with parasympathetic nervous system activation.
Like Pavlov's dogs, but for sleep.
Exactly. Over time, the child's brain associates the warm bath as step 1 of the physiological shutdown sequence. By the time the second book is opened, the brain has already been autonomously pumping natural melatonin into the bloodstream for 30 minutes.
You eliminate the need for a synthetic supplement by just perfectly engineering the environment for the body to do what it has done for millennia.
Precisely.
So what does this all mean? When we aggregate all this data, the massive 530% spike in usage, the terrifying reality of serotonin contamination, the thousands of ER visits, and the unknown impacts on pubertal development, the thesis of this deep dive becomes undeniable.
Melatonin is a powerful systemic hormone.
It demands the exact level of clinical respect, caution, and oversight that any other hormone requires.
Yes. But there is a critical medical caveat here from both the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Mayo Clinic that we must explicitly state right now.
Yes, very important.
If your child is currently taking daily melatonin, do not stop cold turkey tonight.
Do not just throw the bottle away tonight. The mechanics of withdrawal are severe here, right?
Very. Because of the receptor downregulation we discussed, abruptly removing the exogenous melatonin leaves a brain that has temporarily forgotten how to produce its own.
So it actually makes things worse?
Way worse. It triggers severe rebound insomnia, making the sleep disruption exponentially worse than before you started.
Okay, so what should parents do?
Parents must consult their pediatrician. If medical oversight determines melatonin is still somehow required, the clinical mandate is to use the absolute lowest effective dose for the shortest possible duration, strictly under a doctor's supervision.
Right, because it is not a daily vitamin you just blindly grab from the supermarket shelf.
No, it's not.
We started this deep dive by looking at how seamlessly modern marketing has normalized basically bypassing a really difficult parenting moment with a strawberry-flavored gummy.
A quick fix?
Yeah, but the science forces us to confront a much larger, more lingering concept. And I want to leave you with this thought. If we are so incredibly quick to permanently supplement a powerful hormone, a hormone that a child's brain is perfectly capable of producing autonomously under the right environmental conditions, what other essential biological skills are we accidentally short-circuiting in the name of modern convenience?
That is a profound question.
Something to heavily consider the next time you navigate the supplement aisle.